So we're live for everyone joining us. This is Geraint Anderson, and he has written, can you just repeat exactly the title of the new book coming out, Geraint?
How to Con Friends and Manipulate People, The Subtle Art of Being a Total Psychopath. So I've obviously got two of the most famous self-help books around, one very old, back in the 50s, and one more recent. And I'm trying to it's a simple parody of a self-help book, but this one happens to be written by a psychopath. The conceit being that the world has become so egregious that the only way to survive in these post-shame, post-truth world is through ruthless manipulation. And without sounding hyper pretentious, it's in a grand tradition of things like Jonathan Swift and Daniel Defoe, of writing something that is theoretically quite serious. There's going to be people who read this book and say, "Oh, that's how you get by. That's how he did. He did quite well in the city." But then every paragraph or two, there is something that should hopefully remind you, this is not the way to go ahead. But they did force me to put a 4-page part at the end called "But seriously, folks," in case.
Really?
They insisted.
Okay.
Yeah. They just said, my wife said that should not have happened, but they insisted. They said, look, there are some people out there, never underestimate the intelligence, especially if, I know this sounds extremely rude, of our American readers. And they said there's people who are going to be reading this thinking it is a serious book. And just as Jonathan Swift in 1729, he wrote a book called A Modest Proposal, in which he said, look, it's very simple. We've got all these poor Irish people starving. They should fatten up their kids and sell them to be eaten. And it is written in the most serious way. And the idea was to use exaggeration and irony and so forth to exploit and show and highlight just how horrifically these people were being treated. Likewise, this book really is trying to say politics and business has got so disgusting, even since I left my career in the city 17 years ago. It's got worse, especially politics, that someone can actually write a book saying you need to be a psychopath to survive. And that the irony is that there are going to be people out there who actually say, yes, this man's got a point. And that's the scary thing. Of course, hero, the guy who's written this book, but the voice I'm using, his heroes are Trump, Putin, Netanyahu, etc., Boris Johnson. To some extent, Liz Truss, although she was obviously a bit of a failure. So it's been so much fun to write. So much fun to write.
So that was the first thing that really struck me was, what percentage of people might take this seriously at some point through it. And the reason for that was right at the beginning, and I'm going to read very early on, this bit. So, and once I've read it out, I'll tell you why. So this is me reading your work to you, Geraint. This is the introduction. What we have here is a culture war that began with the birth of the so-called new man, a Cro-Magnon chancellor who discussed hair products to further his carnal agenda. Unfortunately, this has culminated in the recent woke revolution, an appalling development that has led to 76% of Gen Zs admitting that they are intimidated by sentences that end in a full stop and find telephone conversations to be overly stressful. Indeed, things have now become so woke that Conan the Barbarian's entirely reasonable raison d'etre to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their women would today probably be deemed to be triggering. Nowadays, even dear old Conan would get cancelled. Such is the woeful state of the modern world.
Yes.
So, it's very good. I had a conversation with a super brilliant woman called Susan Morgan last year, who's in tech. And she was talking to me. It was the first time I'd really heard this, but you will have heard it. She was the first person who started talking to me about how the liberal left, the wokerati, had given birth to Trump.
Definitely. There was without a doubt that the pendulum swung too far, and it was so easy for Trump to find things out. Like, look at them; the pronouns. I think one of the greatest advert he did, which was deemed to be the most powerful. I can't remember the exact wording. It was like, "They are for them. They are for them. We are for you." It was better than that. Essentially, they're all about pronouns.
Very clever.
Yeah, really clever. And
yeah.
in a sense, one has to be a bit careful with this book, because there are times where I do compare, for example, the kind of the woke revolution with fascism. But then I say, and I mean that for once in a bad way. And obviously this is all exaggerating, and the reader, have to be very careful with all this stuff. And what I mean by that is that when you have very, very strict rules about exactly what you can and can't do, this creates limits. And for someone who's trying to be humorous and, likes the odd gag, that can be a tad troubling. So again, this voice that I've used for this book has allowed me, I guess, to somewhat express those feelings. But generally, he's just a pure psychopath, and woke is the least of his concerns. Empathy is the concern he has most, and that is what I find most fascinating. When I hear Elon Musk saying empathy is the ultimate weakness of the Western world. When
I was about to pull that quote out.
And
just say it again. Just say it again so everybody really hears that as a quote. This is what Musk said.
The fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. Now, it was said in context of something else, but that has become the new mantra of the right. And even there are people in the kind of evangelical Christian right who kind of consider it to be like the 11th commandment, thou shalt not be empathetic, twisting the ordained religion so the exact opposite of what Jesus Christ would obviously actually would preach. And the other interesting part about that, and if you get to that sort of last chapter, is the guy Gilbert, who was the chief psychologist at the Nuremberg rallies, when asked what was the thing that connected in fact, all the defendants at the Nuremberg rallies in 1945, post-Second World War, the Nazis, he said it was lack of empathy. And so with my first book, City Boy, the conclusion had the somewhat trite, conclusion was, all we need is love. In this one, at the very end, I say, actually, in this modern world that we're living in, empathy is the consideration that I would really, love, obviously, that kind of goes without saying, but empathy for each other, the concept of actually putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And it seems to be a skill now that our politicians are actively saying, don't do it. It's a bad idea, that's kind of inspired the book, because, of course, the principal quality that psychopaths have is a lack of empathy. So in a way, if our leaders aren't psychos themselves, they are at the very least, the Netanyahus, the Trumps, etc., are suggesting that do not empathize. That is weakness. And that's scary.
Well, particularly scary for, we know neurologically that young people up until the age of 25, you haven't really developed the neurological pathways to really step into the sort of heart and soul of empathy. You're still learning it. So having it modeled to you under the age of 25 is absolutely crucial for anyone to be able to step into that and understand it, from the inside out. Absolutely. And the other thing that really struck me about this was that one of the things that the liberal left has done successfully in terms of showing the fascist right how to do it is cancellation, is that going so far that there's you can say this and you can't say that and you'll be cancelled for this. And that line, I had an interesting conversation with Sam Jorgensen about this within the literary world. He's a founder of Galley Beggar. And within the literary world, it's been hamstrung, in terms of what one can say and what one can't say within a piece of literature. But so certainly it's gone too far, and we just had a sort of general discussion about where that line is, because on the one hand you don't want to be shouting obscenities and upsetting somebody just for the goddamn sake of it, but on the other hand, going so far as cancellation, if you make a mistake or you're ill-informed, all the rest of it, absolutely, it feels to me we showed Trump exactly we gave him permission really to cancel and block out entire voices, which is what he's doing so successfully
it just becomes an echo chamber, doesn't it? It's just like, especially on social media, the triumvirate of evil, internet, social media, smartphones, you enter that echo chamber, all you hear is your same opinions voiced back to you, never challenged, And I think, was it Samuel Johnson who said, I disagree with you vehemently, but I will defend to the death your right to say what you say. You have to be challenged. That is,
Yeah.
you might as well just throw in the towel as an intellectual, an academic, or a writer.
Right.
Um, but as I say, it's about this particular book it's a grand tradition of using satire. And it's such a powerful force, particularly for authoritarians, because their social control relies on this kind of authoritarianism. It relies on this mystique, this sort of strongman thing. And if you can just the best way to puncture that in so many ways is just through satire and humor. It's through ridiculous exaggeration and parody. And I don't know if you've been seeing Gavin Newsom's tweets. Gavin
Yeah.
Newsom, he's the
Yeah.
governor
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
California. And
Mm.
he has been doing this beautiful thing. And I did write something on Substack about it, where he has literally just copied the bullying, absurd, thin-skinned, prickly little nonsense that Trump comes out with, all capital tweets. And the Republicans have been saying this is unbecoming of a governor of California to write these ridiculous things. And he just writes, they still haven't got it. I'm doing this as
Wow.
a joke. Trump is doing this as real. And you weaklings, So I really do believe in the power of parody and satire. And, on that note, this book was supposed to be called Make Yourself Great Again. I even trademarked it. I had it all planned, Had the red hat,
Yeah.
make yourself great
Yeah.
again, and the scream mask, the kind of psycho mask underneath.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was so
Yeah.
proud of this title. It went
Yeah.
to the US sales force and they just said, this is impossible. You cannot use this title. And I wondered why. And they gave me some good commercial reasons. And then I thought maybe these guys are on the front line of free speech. Maybe these publishers are. And the game is not worth the candle. The risk that there is that Trump will come after them with such an obvious mockery of him, that's such an obvious piss take of Trump, that maybe they would get what Harvard University has had, what the law firms that have dared to challenge him, what any group, rhinos, whoever they are. And I suddenly thought, yeah, Jesus. And they also said they don't want some limey pointing the finger from across the Atlantic and mocking them, which I felt was also quite a valid thing. But because I guess Trump is one of the main targets because he's the game changer. He is having studied American history, just to see what that man's up to see the sheer nastiness, bullying, the lying. It's just it viscerally creates. I mean, I've got Trump derangement syndrome in droves, but it's
Okay.
justified. That's the difference.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah. Well, and latest developments, I was rather pleased, obviously not pleased for Venezuela nor potentially Greenland, but in terms of timing, that I should be speaking to you right now,
Yeah.
only days after this, utterly illegal, obviously, and deeply performative. I was listening to a podcast a few hours ago about the live stream photographs of the Venezuelan now deposed
It is always
president in ankle chains.
Yeah. He chooses his staff basically on their looks.
Right.
Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War now. I mean, it's so preposterous. This is actually the problem. He's hard to satirize because he's so preposterous anyway. It's like when Henry Kissinger got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1973 and then they said satire is dead. He's so preposterous. And this is what the young people perhaps don't necessarily understand is without the rule of law, you have a might is right situation. It's very simple. The guy with the biggest stick gets to tell you how to run your life. And the rule of law protects the little guy. And what Trump is doing, and not just for America, is making the rule of law seem ridiculous and unacceptable and making it reduce. It's defunct. It's not in the modern world. And of course, this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And at a time when we're in a battle for hearts and minds across the world for people going, should we go the authoritarian route or should we go this route? He is discrediting democracy in the best possible way. And now this spheres of influence concept, China gets Asia, Russia gets sort of Central Europe, and we get the whole of the Americas and Greenland, I mean, that's back on the agenda.
It's very much back on the agenda. Yeah, it
I
is.
mean, I
What's
don't
the
know about.
attraction in terms of empathy? If we just look at empathy,
Mm,
what's the
mm,
attraction for those who think he's fantastic and love it and vote for him, and for Farage and for Netanyahu? What's the
yeah.
attraction?
I think it's extreme times call for extreme measures. I think I may be wrong, but I think a lot of people put that cross on that, holding their nose to some extent. They're saying, okay, look, they can see, people are smart enough to see that we're entering a really, really volatile, difficult period. Immigration is just going to increase and increase and increase as global warming, hits sub-Saharan Africa, hits South America. We're going to have just mass immigration, and people are like, this is not acceptable. Combine that with a right-wing media telling us all that, the immigrants are all rapists. And that, when he came up with that stuff, I was just befuddled by it. How can people do this shit? And, they're all rapists and they're all murderers and they're all straight from the prison. So extreme times call for extreme measures. And you know what you and I lived through when we knew each other in the 90s? It was an extraordinary time. I call it a time of complacent optimism, because we had a situation where the Berlin Wall fell, 89. We had USSR collapse, 1990. Then we had South Africa, apartheid ending. We had the Good Friday Agreement in Ireland. We had, what's his name, Yasser Arafat and one of the Israeli prime ministers shaking hands. It looked like it was the dawn of a new era.
The dawn of a new era.
And it was, obviously,
And we partied like it too.
and that will then, combine that with ecstasy and the music that came out with it. And
It was
suddenly
wild.
it was just, and it sounds terrible, obviously nostalgia ain't what it used to be, but it
Yeah.
is, but the bottom line is that we lived through an extraordinary time. And as a historian, which is what I did at university, I suddenly was like, oh my God, this is it. Freedom and democracy have won. Francis Fukuyama wrote his book, The End of History. And suddenly, when things went, then of course 9/11 happened. In fact, Putin came in 31st of December 1999, somewhat symbolically. 9/11 happened, 2001.
Yeah.
You got your forever wars, and then of course you got Ukraine and Gaza, etc. And I was genuinely upset with myself. I said, "You fool!
Right.
You're like one of these idiots who sort of get involved in a kind of financial bubble and get pulled up by the kind of the ridiculous optimism and completely unfounded. This is what history is. This is what humans are. They fight about shit. We are just semi-evolved bonobos, and we may have, godlike. What was that great expression? The problem with humanity is we have godlike technology, medieval institutions, and sort of chimpanzee brains or something. It's something like this. And it is,
Yeah.
and we just had, you and I, when I knew you, we had the best of it. And one of the articles I wrote on Substack is said the 90s, the humanity's final masterpiece. Not a necessarily positive thing for people with children like you and I as well.
Yeah. I mean, how do you talk to your children about it? And how old are your children? Give us some ages.
14 and 12. And
Okay, and how do you talk to them about it? And what questions are they asking you?
I bullshit them. I say, yeah, I'll tell you why I bullshit them. I don't let them hear the pessimism that I feel regarding, the environment, Trump, Ukraine, Putin, China. It's just, you don't want to ruin the bubble. So at the moment, they're young enough. I just want to keep them in their bubble of happiness. I don't feel so much anxiety around. There was like a sort of plague of it. And that's kind of one interesting thing about psychopaths, of course. The very thing, I said in this introduction to the book, one thing psychos don't have is anxiety. In fact, they don't they don't even consider it. If depression is sort of stuff based on the past and anxiety is concerns regarding the future, then they don't have that. So it's like I say, it's a panacea for all the world's ills, and make a mockery of the fact that people actually concern themselves about what's happening to people across the world. How would you do this? So I don't want to increase their anxiety, and I will, when they're a bit older, I will be more honest with them. But at the moment, it's the magical fairy kingdom, and all's well and good.
And are they asking questions though? The 14-year-old particularly.
She Yes, she did. She is. And I will tell her that there's been that in many ways we've never had it so good. I.e., look at the health situation. Look at
Right.
62. Look at the Cuban Missile Crisis. People thought it was game over. Look at Second World War, the Great Depression, Spanish flu in 1919. I mean, the 20th century was the most bloody, heinous time, and the last 40 years, relatively speaking, have been pretty delightful. Really, it's just
I think they've been the most peaceful on Earth. I know that seems
mm,
counterintuitive, but I think statistically they have,
yeah.
which is kind of extraordinary.
We've
Yeah,
got this free healthcare, and drugs that would have
in the UK.
a million, hundreds
Yeah,
of diseases that would have killed us like that,
yeah.
not so long ago. And so there's a lot to be positive about. And technology does often come to, remember the old ozone layer. I mean, there we were
Right.
all a bit
I
concerned
know.
about it, weren't we?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I was reminded of it the other day because I was writing the last chapter to a book that I had to rewrite something and bring it slightly up to date.
Is this
And I
Fallout
was thinking,
coming out in
it Fallout,
April?
exactly. And I was thinking, well, what was the climate thing in the mid 80s?
Mm,
Because it was only just beginning to breach the sort of national consciousness. And I went,
yeah,
oh my God, the ozone layer. Fuck
yeah.
me. That was just seems so pedestrian now, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I
Jesus.
mean, it dealt with
Not
just
using
cross those
parasols.
trays. Yeah, I think this one's going to be a little bit more complicated than that, unfortunately. But
Yeah, yeah.
it's I'm been buying my. It's really interesting as well. My wife is a real empath and a real very emotional, and she is now no longer listening to the news.
Yeah.
So when I'm listening to Radio 4 Today program, getting the kid, and she comes up straight off, and straight onto
Yeah.
the radio
Don't
today.
hear it.
That I just
Yeah.
don't want to hear, and I think that's happening across the world. People, obviously, it's no news. Plane lands safely, and Heathrow. That's not news. It's just this barrage. We're not hardwired for this non-stop barrage of horrific shit that's going on everywhere, and of course the media have got a self-interest in exaggerating how terrible things are. So I was wondering if that is something, and I'm no conspiracy theorist, but I was wondering a little bit if that could be part of an agenda of certain people. Make them, let,
Oh.
let, let them not understand what's going on.
Oh,
Make that
sure.
decision themselves.
Turn up the volume on fear, you will always, I mean, I won't, but one, it seems statistically, turn up the volume on fear and votes for the right go up. That's just like a
Absolutely.
very fucking basic equation.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Because
Although the
actually the
Guardian,
world is full.
weirdly, is the biggest propagator of fear. When I was
They are a
in,
newspaper, though. Even if they're
yeah,
left wing, they can be a
yeah,
real pain in the ass. And they're a
yeah,
newspaper. They
but
have
they
to sell.
seem, like when COVID happened, and we tried to spend the whole time here in Mexico for COVID. We were
Yeah,
like,
I'm
let's just
sure.
see the
Yeah.
whole thing out, and eventually things got way too sketchy, and we got the kind of last copter out of Saigon situation. And basically, as the one piece of advice that Jess Fellows gave us was, when you're reading papers about this, perhaps don't read The Guardian so much because, that catastrophizes. And it
Yep.
plays into this kind of narrative that us more progressive liberal types, we're kind of panickers. Whereas, right wing Republicans, they're big, strong people who kind of go, yeah, whatever, we don't wear masks. We just cruise around. It's all going to be fine. And maybe there's an element of truth. Maybe it shouldn't be, because the right wing, in theory, have a far more sort of cynical, negative appraisal of human nature. They think if you leave your window open, you will be burgled. Whereas the left wing has a more like, we can cooperate. We're not just, chimps. Um, and so, but it doesn't seem to translate into the perception of news. The right wing seems
Yeah.
to be, maybe it's this kind of macho strongman bullshit, but that,
Yeah.
they're not wearing the mask became a real sort of litmus test for whether you're left or right. And I mean, ultimately, I would say, well, if it's preventing the likelihood that that guy gets a potentially lethal disease, I'm on the mask front. Call me, old fashioned, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
It's confusing and conflicting, I think, because I think you're right. Conservatives with a small c, and certainly that was, my parents' generation. It was toughen up, pull your socks up, kind of
yes,
a view of how to deal if you were hurt yourself in any way. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? So there was
yeah,
no kind of head stroking at all. And yet my mother absolutely read The Guardian and was a socialist and voted Labour.
yeah.
So, you know, that there's a tally there that doesn't quite add up. But I think the media, you know, I mean, I listen to political podcasts. In fact, I was listening to one the other day that said a growing majority of people are getting their news through the medium of podcasts and not directly from media outlets,
Mm,
which means it's the same difference, really, because the podcasts we're choosing are going to be the ones within which we feel comfortable and blah,
yeah,
blah, unless we actively, and I do actively try and listen to them, that listen to hosts who I wouldn't necessarily want to sit down next to at dinner.
yeah.
But I wonder where the line is between turning away and preserving one's nervous system.
I guess it's, this is the snowflake issue as well, isn't it? Again,
Yeah,
using terminology I'm not hugely comfortable with.
yeah.
For me, truth supersedes everything else. So, and also I am quite thick-skinned. I mean, there's this book about being a psychopath. It was partly motivated by the fact that I didn't become the best version of myself when I was working, and I do naturally have quite a thick skin, especially relative to, when these statistics, which seem so preposterous about people finding full stops to be overly abrupt and slightly
Is
kind of
that a
aggressive.
true? Is that a?
I made up the
Is
number,
that a
but that
true?
the number is made up because, of course, he makes up. It
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
said in brackets after one of them. Please note, when fabricating statistics, it makes sense to just make them as precise as possible. So 76.2% of people, you know what I mean? It's like that. The old
But
gag,
the
isn't it?
full stop bit is true,
There is
is
an
it?
element, yeah, I'm not, but it won't be 76% of Gen.
No, no, no. But that's very. I mean, it's funny and not funny, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. And and I am sure if there's younger people watching, they're probably just saying, "Oh God, look at these two people in their 50s." Blah, blah, blah.
oh, fucking
These are
old people, shut
fucking up
up.
people, yeah. Mansplaining again, or not in your case, but
I
mansplaining.
don't think there's anyone young on Substack. I think we're all right, Geraint.
Okay, thank God for that.
Yeah.
But it is, toughening up is not such a bad thing, and
Not such a
actually,
bad thing.
no, and I think with my book, there is an element where it's obviously a complete and utter piss take, and it's recommending the most ruthless, manipulative, ambitious, Machiavellian way of getting to the top. And obviously the bloke who's written this book, but my character, his heroes are the Trumps and Netanyahus of the world. And the very fact that he loves them to such an extent is obviously condemns them because the guy is a psychopath. But there is a part of it where you do say, look, being a bit tough, we're handing the right some really nice targets.
We're handing
If
them a
we,
playbook.
if we're just, I noticed that AOC um, in the States the day after Trump won, she removed the pronoun in her Twitter kind of bio thing. She removed them.
Yeah,
My pronouns are they, them.
yeah, yeah.
You suddenly realize, oh, we've played into their hands. We've given them
Absolutely.
ammo. Let's focus on the shit that actually they care about. That people care about. Let's think about price of bleeding eggs in Michigan. You know what I mean? Like, let's
Yeah,
focus on that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I know it's incredibly important to people, the pronoun stuff and that, but it certainly played its role in electing a man who is doing everything in his power to ruin the reputation of democracy and liberalism and freedom and yet couching it in these terms. The agenda that he and the Koch brothers and Peter Thiel and all those fuckwits over there is essentially this. We need to tell these people how to live and how to behave because they are electing the wrong type of people because either they're stupid or they're foreign, you know? And
Yeah, yeah.
therefore it's time, the time of that nice democratic ideals is over. And that's why, again, I don't want to keep on going back to the book, but
No,
I
keep
feel,
going back to the book. That's why we're
well,
here.
I
Yeah,
feel
yeah.
that the book is quite timely because
Mm.
it's ultimately saying you go down this path, then I'm afraid it's the old kind of, if you start burning books, you'll be burning people next. I'm not going quite that extreme, but you go down this path. You say empathy is the principal cause of weakness in Western civilization. You say that all these concerns about minorities, etc., are silly. You go down that bullying, misogynistic, obviously dog whistle racism stuff that's being used. Bad hombres and urban thugs is black people. Bad hombres is Latin American thugs. It's so obvious that, and then combine that with a right wing media. And my thing I really want to teach my kids more than anything is, as I said perhaps earlier, was that you teach them to see through the bullshit. It's almost with the rise of AI, I'm almost feeling like that should be its principal goal. Like just understand, just question and understand, and then bring back subtlety. Here's an idea. It's not black and white. It's bring back nuance.
How about a bit of nuance? And also, I think to not be afraid of language, and that's one of the things I find deeply funny and refreshing, and really it makes it really easy to read your latest this book. Is because, of course, you take it to the extreme, and of course, the guy writing it is a psychopath, and he is saying outrageous things. But what he's also doing is he's not falling over himself to make sure he doesn't offend anyone. He's doing exactly. He doesn't give a shit. He's just saying exactly what he fucking well wants to say, and he's saying it very fucking clearly. And that ability to say that, to not get so hamstrung by the fear of upsetting someone. And again, I stress, I understand he's a psychopath and he says outrageous things, but there's somewhere back towards the center where you and I, and I don't adhere to liberal left anymore because I can see the absolute damage that has happened there. But whatever I am, I know that being around and being free to own plain speak and say what I think and get it wrong, because I'm coming from a place of loving kindness. That is my central baseline, right? That's my intention, is loving kindness, empathy, to allow and understand. That's and we are all equal under the sun, end of. So within those parameters, I want to be able to fucking speak and say what I think and get it wrong and be forgiven and learn and all that kind of shit. And this book really emphasizes in a very funny way the power of that. If those readers and those watching now, and maybe those who watch it in record, or friends who haven't really got to this point yet, if they haven't understood the power of the language that Trump and Netanyahu and all the rest of it, what they've done, exactly that phrase right from the get-go that you quoted, they, them, but I'm for you, whatever that. He fucking nailed it, because it was absolutely easy to understand. And it's that bit, I think, the liberal left have been tripping over themselves and becoming completely unable to understand. So no wonder.
And it's hugely liberating being able to put on a different voice for me, because obviously it kind of makes the humor that much more, but also to just really add in yet more pretension into what is already a heady mix. I make him quite seductive. The guy who's writing and saying, the subtle art of being a total psychopath, he is quite seductive in the sense that you go, God, yeah, that probably would get you up the corporate ladder. Yes, that has, and it'd be like, here's lie like Trump. Here's 10 ways of lying like Trump. And that is similar to what John Milton did in Paradise Lost. So the character of Lucifer there is this dynamic, pretty cool guy. He says he's amazingly brave, courageous, and dynamic things. And then he'll say this, and the reader will go, God, he's yeah. And then it will say, "Thus spake the bringer of death to all mankind," just to bring you back. And his concept was, look, we're all post-lapsarian. We're after the fall of man. We are sinners. And so what he does, he's given you an emotional reaction. And what I have tried to do, as well as make it so absurd that eventually you can't help but realize that this guy's way of going about business and so forth is preposterous. He eventually recommends killing your chief executive, for example. That's the bit where if you haven't really got the satire by now, he goes,
hopefully you'll get it at that point.
Yeah. He says, I know that it might seem a little extreme, but you don't want this guy, potentially coming to take revenge on you. But up until that point, there's many times when the character seems to be quite sensible, and then suddenly there's just no, listen, this therein lies madness. And I mean, it's a kind of grand tradition of and we Brits, hopefully it's one of the things we do best, and we look at kind of, I don't know, Doctor Strangelove. I mean, The Handmaid's Tale is in a way is a satire, but one without humor. I don't think the definition of satire requires humor. It often uses it, especially now than in its modern parlance. But all I do know is that more than anything, authoritarians hate it, and that means I like it.
Yeah, and what is that? Because Satan is sexy, we all know that, right? But so there's that correlation that's kind of clear, but there's also a clear correlation between a complete lack of humour and the far right. And I wonder why. Do you know why that is? Why aren't they funny? Because if they were funny, they really would be deadly. Then we'd all be in fucking trouble. Do you know what I mean? But thank God they're not.
They'd say the opposite. They'd say, you lefties, you can't make any jokes anymore because you're worried about offending this minority or this group. All those old traditional kind of, northern, what was that guy? Bernard?
Yeah, what's his name?
Bernard Manning.
Bernard Manning.
Yeah, all that. They would say, oh, you bloody Guardian reading liberals, you need to lighten up. That's always the line. So actually, they might say quite the opposite. They'd say, no, we are the guys who could, remember those awful jokes just before the election? Something about Haiti being like a pile. Oh, there's this pile of junk floating around in the Atlantic. Oh, it's called Haiti or something. It was something so do you remember? It was just, and then they
I think I wiped that from my mind.
I mean, what they do, and what is hilarious and awful, is that they are their principal agenda seems to be to own the libtards. That's what it is. It's own the libtards. And what I find fascinating about today's politics, and it's all in here, is it's the 60s. Your view of the 60s essentially determines if you're left or right. If you think the environmental movement that started then, the feminist movement started then, the anti-racist movement started there, the peace movement, blah, blah, blah. If you're kind of and the more progressive views on drugs and sex and promiscuity, etc., if you think those are a good thing, you're a progressive liberal. And if you don't, you're right wing, bring back family values, make America great again. I mean, what does that mean? When the 1950s, like that
it doesn't mean anything, but
it meant 11 states in America didn't allow blacks to vote and had segregation in the period that they seek to affect. I mean, it's just none of this should have surprised me. That's why I said earlier, I was when I saw this shit happening in America, I was like, oh, guys, you forgot, don't you? You forgot you had that brief, complacent idealism of the 90s combined with good ecstasy and some some nice raves around the sort of M25.
And pre-family and marriage and all that kind of stuff, no responsibilities, all that. It was a heady mix. So when did you start writing? What was happening in the world when you picked up when you sat down and wrote the first few lines of this book?
Okay,
what was that? Where were we?
Succession.
Yeah.
So I was watching Succession, and I looked at the character Logan Roy, and I went, that man is kind of a psychopath. And look, and so are many that and that is kind of it's but he's also an attractive character. So he got the idea. Then the truth of the matter is that when I first wrote City Boy, and it did pretty well.
You did well, yeah.
The book that my agent told me to write after that was a book, a sort of business corporate self-help book. But I mean,
this one
in a serious way, because I did.
Did she know you? Had she met you?
Yeah, that's exactly what I said. I've never met before. And I was like, joking. So then, then these things came together, and then I saw what was going on. Trump, Putin, Netanyahu, And I suddenly, you've got, you have to do something about this. Now, I'm not just even remotely naive enough to believe that this book is going to change the world. Although, of course,
He
but
thinks it
there
will.
is, yeah. I mean, he thinks it will for the wrong reasons.
For the
He
wrong
thinks that,
reasons, yeah.
yeah. But the point, I guess, is that it felt like I had a need to try and do my very best to expose in a way that we Brits can do quite well and have been doing for centuries,
Yeah.
using satire as the tool, a parody of a self-help book that suggests the only way you can survive is by acting like a psychopath, and then saying, unfortunately, only 1% of us are. So I'm going to help you fake it till you make it. And that's and just follow my guidelines, act like and there is a slightly deeper purpose to this, which is, you know, there are a lot of psychos out there. I mean, there was a genuine statistic that said 20% of CEOs have psychopathic tendencies. It's a slightly general term. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
psychopathy is like it's like a stream of dials, and they'll and you could have different. It's not a sort of binary thing, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, when they look at the people who've done tests, or psychologists have looked at presidents. I mean, the classic ones would be JFK would be the number one psychopathic president. Then you've got Clinton. Yeah. Funnily enough, I don't think Clinton's up there. Yeah, these and the ones least psychopathic, Jimmy Carter, a man who
And
singularly failed.
I
I
know.
is there an argument there? This partly serious here, but partly taking the piss, that the ruthless, decisive people who can just send people to their deaths, or they make the kind of presidents that work. Trump is
Well,
less.
surely they built the system, though, Geraint. Surely they built the
Yeah,
system,
and it's
so
also
it's gonna work for them.
and it's whether you view the world in this kind of social Darwinistic way, might is right.
Yeah.
This is what Trump's doing. I would call
Mm.
Trump a malignant narcissist more than a true.
Okay.
He's too thin-skinned. He's too impulsive. He's sort of he's like he's a malignant narcissist. And there's a lot of
He's a
crossover.
moron. He's a moron. Do you have to? Do you have to be? Do you think intelligent? You have to be clever. In all seriousness, is cleverness like
Not
mental
really. No,
intelligence part of psychopathy? No.
obviously I've done a lot of research for
Yeah, yeah.
this books by Dutton and various other and various people who've. There's not really a great correlation, but
Okay.
in this book,
That's not a need. Okay.
yeah, in this book he claims, and also the whole thing between sociopath and psychopath is kind of up there. Is it just a US term? Is one an impulsive, like, I'll stab you in the neck with a biro for no, just for the hell of it?
Yeah, I've never really understood the difference. I mean, Peter Thiel, I think we can put firmly in that club, can't we?
I think
Peter Thiel.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, he would claim. Of course, he would claim that that's not the case. But
Would claim.
it's difficult. It's difficult. But to me, the definition that the guy who's written this book, i.e., me, is of the classic Hannibal Lecter type person, super intelligent, nothing reckless, totally oriented towards ambition and achieving goals at the expense of all others. People are just pawns in your game. And if I can get the reader to buy into that for a minute before reminding him that this would make the world.
Or her.
Or her, yeah. Well, there is, yes, no, you're quite right. You're quite right. It is, there tend to be less female psychopaths, actually.
Why is that?
I'm
Why
not
is that?
sure. Is it, what the conceit of the book is that psychopathy is a real world superpower.
Yeah.
And that actually, back in the good Lord has actually invented them, because when there was, as I said in the kind of introduction, when there's a lion in the only suitable cave you need to go or get your tribe need to go and stay in, who do you call up? Call up bring forth the psychopath. The fearless, decisive. The guys who he took them. There was a terrorist incident, and he took down a narwhal horn recently. This is a few years ago, and kind of attacked the terrorist. He was an ex-prisoner, I think, and I think he had psychopathic tendencies. I mean, in that kind of scenario, you want them on your team. And I guess the argument that Trump, etc., would have is we are in a global scenario of that nature now. It's extreme times. That namby-pamby lefty stuff, that's all well and good when things are sweet. But this is now the time of the strong men. And it is always men, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, and I know, I can see that's the conceit of the character who wrote the book. Obviously, he's a misogynist on top of everything else.
Yeah.
You can see lots of messages coming in here now saying that there are thousands of female psychopaths in history out there, which I absolutely believe. And in fact, I was reading something the other day that they now understand, obviously this is going to be the case, but it wasn't up until now, that back in Neanderthal times when we were out catching lions for our dinner, the hunting teams were made up of 50-50 male and female.
And there's some stuff coming up about sociopaths being created, and that is certainly one of the, and psychopaths are literally hardwired in a different way. And one of the things that, was said was one of the more intellectual kind of points that a publisher who declined this book was that, can we really kind of talk about psychopaths in this way? And then that's taking things a little bit too seriously. I've done my research into what psychopathy is. What we're really talking about here is a big joke that has a purpose. I think the Onion, the Onion, are you familiar with that? It had a rather nice definition of satire, which is it's the art of being a wise ass and saying it's for a higher purpose. And that's
great. That sounds like straight Peter Cook, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And the Peter Cook quote.
I know, I've got it in front of me. Shall I read it out?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Just think of those wonderful Berlin cabarets, which did so much to stop the rise of Hitler and prevent the outbreak of the Second World War. That's right in the butt, seriously, but it's absolutely true.
And it's that is when you have to just suddenly realize that whatever your attempts to change, I with City Boy, so I wrote that 2007, and I said, it's gone crazy. The cutting edge of capitalism has gone totally crazy, and now it is just short-term profit-making greed. It's always been there, but now it's really gone accelerated into new realms of hideousness. And I guess I could then rather arrogantly look back at when the financial crisis happened, when Lehman's fell in September 2008, and said, "I told you so." You know what I mean? And again here, it is again, it's that Peter Cook quote that I use. I'm obviously trying to expose the fact that satire can only do so much, but it really is it's a warning. It's saying, look, I genuinely think there's this post-truth, post-shame world we're living in. It's not normal.
No.
Not normal.
And what's being modelled to not just our children, but to us, what's being modelled on a daily basis is a not to care and to go for yourself, and that we are singular, isolated beings on a spinning through space on a rock, which completely counts out, thousands of years of spiritual wisdoms and our own, our own sense, when you do sit quietly on a hill and look out, of this immense network of connection, which is as real as the rise of fascism and the atrocities happening all over the world. I was listening to Tara Brach this morning in conversation, and she was talking about radical acceptance, and someone was asking her actually, how do you practice radical acceptance in the face of atrocities? And it's a major question, and she answers it very beautifully, really, in terms of understanding that radical acceptance is not saying this is fine, it's okay that this has happened, but it is saying this has happened. This has happened. Like, it's so that line between like not turning away, but looking after your nervous system. It felt to me that exact place was the place where I felt I could stand in the face of all of this.
You and I grew up with Thatcher and Reagan. And she famously said, although people say it was misquoted, there's no such thing as society. It's just a bunch of individuals fighting for their own thing. And you and I know, and weirdly, it's kind of connected to the rave scene and the ecstasy that, that when we were hanging out. Communitas, this concept is so vital to mental well-being, and I believe, that triumvirate of evil, that the internet combined with the smartphones combined with social media, which was supposed to connect us, has done the exact opposite. And now lots of people are just thinking in the individual. And the other big target, of course, of this book, as well as Trump, Netanyahu, Putin, is Andrew Tate, because
Oh.
you've got two boys, I've got one boy,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
in this world that has come into being, where we've had maybe in the last 50, 60 years more transformation between male-female relations than in the previous 6,000 years, this is yet another reaction to it. And Andrew Tate, of course, is the hero of the book. Again, by being his hero, he's condemned.
Yeah.
And my concern is that nice, well-educated kids are actually buying in to this horrific man and his horrific shit. And it's like, okay, let's actually. So again, once again, I hopefully make it quite clear that the way therein lies madness. Okay, you want to go down that road?
Mm.
And this is, and by the way, and I'm constantly talking about the incels that form up 90% of, and the book, the writer of this book is constantly trying to sell his supplements to make you big and strong, because that's the armor men are using. I suspect they're thinking, okay, we're being, educationally, women are beating us. They're moving up the corporate ladder as well. Okay, let's make ourselves big and strong, because that's the only way. No. Let's get back to the who's got the biggest stick as the way of
It's so divisive. And I mean, absolutely, my concern for the bringing up of boys, as much as girls, but particularly, I think boys really are more vulnerable and more at risk in certain areas, and in that sort of in terms of becoming isolated.
Yeah.
And one of the things I noticed with both of mine, but one in particular, was out in Armenia from the age of 16. He went off to live in Armenia at school there. And in his second year, in fact, he wrote it the other day because he has to get a reference or something, he discovered the rave scene in Armenia.
Yeah.
And so it made me think of that as you were talking, what we experienced in the 90s, and that sense of the actual experience of a network that is beyond the iPhone and politics and everything else, is when you're on a dance floor, right? Whether you're high or not, but when you've experienced that, and that's, I had a really amazing conversation with Annie Mack last year via Substack Live, and she's doing these great residencies called Before Midnight that I'm going to be going to, and one of the sort of non-negotiables is no phones.
Absolutely.
No phones there, because she remembers the power of being on a dance floor. And that, for me, if I could give anything really to the young people growing up now, and particularly young boys, is that club scene, is getting on dance floors without their phones and actually experiencing what it is to be connected, because we all know what you feel. You absolutely feel on a par with every sweating body around you, don't you?
Yeah.
You move as one.
It's tribal.
In terms of the antidote, I think that it's tribal, and I feel strongly that it's a very real antidote, particularly to the problem with boys and Andrew Tate.
Completely agree. And I think that isolation they're feeling, a good old rave. I mean,
rave, man.
I'm not condoning the use of ecstasy, but it may help.
I am. I'm condoning. No. You do it sensibly. You know your source. I've always been completely transparent. I just tell them white drugs turn you into a cunt. Don't do them. But source your whatever you're going to take really well. Try it out before, be outside, know what you're doing, be very clear, be with friends.
Yes.
You and I both know that we learnt a lot from psychedelics, and there's no reason why my children shouldn't have that same heady mix too, but you've got to learn nobody taught me the rules. So I teach them the rules because I know that they are out there. So, avoid cocaine because it's boring. Yeah. Don't buy anything that you can't source. Make sure you're with friends and look after yourself. You know what I mean?
Don't have drugs that rhyme with ack. So that's crack, smack, and Prozac.
I think Jacoby's probably listening to this. So you can add that to the parade. That's a brilliant piece of advice.
The words of wisdom. No, but that isolation, the mental health crisis, and the Jonathan Haidt book, the anxious generation and all that.
Yeah.
It just suddenly, you just realize that that isolation, that feeling of I'm alone must be so horrific.
So,
And then that for that to be encouraged by the likes of Tate, Trump, etc., you are essentially an individual. You do not
it's
have
evil.
it is pure evil. You do not,
It is.
and also therein lies madness. In the sense, I know I
Yeah.
keep repeating that phrase, in the sense of, is there a coincidence that there's so much anxiety, depression, and mental health
No.
issues these days when you don't
No.
have that? And I just feel, and of course, in this book, that's exactly what he advocates. He loves Thatcher. He loves
Mhm.
Reagan. There is no such thing as society. You're just a semi-evolved bonobo who is out there, and get yourself big. He says the one thing that he advocates is going down the gym. All other pastimes that aren't dedicated to making you powerful and rich are to be avoided. But this is the one thing you're allowed to do, is go down the gym and get massive. And it is exactly what these and it's just. Anyway, I'm hoping. My concern, Ellie, is that kids don't read books anymore. The phones, the scrolling, the attention span is so small. Even watching
Yeah.
an hour and a half long film apparently is a bit too much for a lot of. Again, we have to be careful not to fall in the trap of being sort of
Old.
middle-aged
Yeah.
people mocking or should I say?
Well, I can just to encourage you. I was on the tube the other day, and I counted 6 young people reading books in
Okay,
my one bit of carriage, which even 6 months ago it wouldn't have been that.
well,
I suspect
there's a reaction
that
again.
there's a reaction because they're not stupid and they are aware that kids are dying. Anxiety is killing them. It's killing young people, kids, adults. I mean, male suicide is absolutely
Yeah,
the biggest killer of men in the UK. I mean, there's absolutely no question about it.
I think that's
So
right. 45, 50. Yeah, it is, isn't it?
exactly. So I suspect we're beginning to see the swing the other way. But obviously, this takes a generation, it's a tragedy unfolding. And we've got Farage coming over the hill here in the
Yeah,
UK,
and even more
that is scaring the
tragically,
shit out of everybody.
how are you and I going to make a living if people aren't buying books? I mean, that's the real tragedy here.
That's the real tragedy. Well, I have to
Forget
say as
about the
well,
damage
just to
to
counter that,
society.
I always record an audio because they do listen to books. So please record
Yeah.
an audio of this book. I'm going to read. We're nearly at time, Geraint. This has been so
Okay.
brilliant. I'm just going to read the very last bit here, which is in the But Seriously.
Okay.
City Boy presciently warned the world that an upcoming financial crisis was imminent, but it was ignored and capitalism almost ground to a halt a year after its publication. We can now only hope that this book is not too late to prevent corporate monsters and psychopathic leaders from completing a hostile takeover of our entire planet. Please note that whilst I may no longer be a psychopath, I retain major delusions of grandeur.
Yeah. Many
It's
a true
completely
word spoken.
brilliant.
Yes.
It's completely brilliant. I've also rather want to. We are actually at time, but the acknowledgements at the front really made me laugh as well. Do you mind if I read those out?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay, here are the acknowledgements. Whilst I believe it is traditional to thank my agent, Claire Gris Taylor, aka The Accidental Agent, my editor, Aus Abdul Haq, my publisher, Canelo, and even my ex-wife, Debbie, there's only one person I really need to thank, and that's me. I want to thank myself for using my incredible talents to produce the most important literary masterpiece since The Art of the Deal. And I want to thank me for sacrificing a week of my precious time, really made me laugh, that otherwise would have been spent at a pleasant orgy on a super yacht to create a peerless masterpiece that will unquestionably still be revered 1,000 years from now.
Yes.
I really believe it will. So please, everybody listening and those watching it on record, Geraint, just tell everyone, we're going to include in the show notes a link to where you can pre-order Geraint's latest books, How to Be a Psychopath, or
Well,
just give us the proper title.
The correct title is How to Con Friends and Manipulate People, The Subtle Art of Being a Total Psychopath. It is coming out in a few months. And, what's interesting now, this is the very start of the journey of, we've got the writing done. Now it's about actually getting it out there. And I think one thing that maybe we've discussed and maybe we should think about, and it's completely up to you, is in a few months' time, we could have a great chat about how and why and whether that military campaign I'm planning has worked or
Hmm.
not. Because your book comes out in April, mine's coming out a month or two later. And I
Yep.
think there's something that people would be interested in. And I have
Hmm.
got, a lot of ideas about that. And maybe that's something that we
Great. Let's do it.
discuss. That would be less about the literature, more about you know,
Marketing.
the marketing shit. Which
Well,
is,
I was talking, a writer reached out to me on Instagram the other day, Frankie Chase, I think she's called, and we had a Zoom chat, and she was saying to me, talked about marketing and publicity. I said, look, Frankie, I'm really shit at marketing. I'm quite good at publicity, but I know a couple of people who are really good at marketing. And that bit, like, I've done the work, and how do I get it out there? How do I get visibility? It's a major question for 99.9% of writers. So yes, let's do it. Let's definitely do it. Okay, brilliant. Loads of love. Love to Mexico. I'm jealous. I can tell you it's snowing here, Geraint, and I'm going to blame you. I'm holding you personally responsible.
So I'll be.
Fuck you. Okay. Loads of love.
Eddie.
See you soon. Bye,
Cheers.
Dom.
Bye.